The wind was mean that morning, dragging dust across the empty road like it had a grudge. Evelyn Shaw kept her boy close, her arm firm around his small shoulders. Jamie was quiet, too quiet for a child his age, and she knew what that meant. Hunger had stolen even his small talk. She tried to hum something from long ago, a lullaby she barely remembered, but her throat was too dry to finish it. When she first saw the wagon up ahead, her heart leapt before she could stop it. Maybe a ride, maybe a bit of Mercy. But she'd learned better than to expect either. Mercy had rules in Dry Hollow: who you were, who your husband had been, who you'd disappointed when you fell too low. And Evelyn had broken every one of those rules the day her husband's debts buried him 6 feet under and left her standing beside a wooden cross with nothing but a child and a half-empty sack of flour. The wagon slowed. The man driving it, broad shoulders, weathered hands, didn't look cruel, just worn down in the same way the land was. "Road's rough for walking," he said, voice low like he didn't want to spook her. Evelyn lifted her chin. "We're not begging." "I didn't say you were." He tipped his hat back, studying her for a long moment, then the boy. "He all right?" She hesitated. Pride could fill your chest one second and choke you the next. Her answer came softer than she meant. "He's all I have." For a moment, only the creak of the wagon wheels filled the space between them. Then the man, Caleb Hart, though she didn't know his name yet, nodded once, almost to himself. "Then you best both climb up," he murmured. "Ain't right to lose what's left." Evelyn didn't move. She'd been offered help before, always with a price she couldn't afford. But something in his tone stopped her from walking away. There was no pity in it, just a quiet understanding that comes from the kind of pain you don't tell anyone about. When she finally lifted Jamie onto the wagon seat, her hands trembled. The boy leaned into her side, and for the first time that morning, he exhaled like someone who believed they might reach another town. Caleb didn't speak again for a while. The road stretched ahead, dry and cruel, and the silence between them grew heavy with unspoken things. She noticed the cracks in his hands, the worn coat patched in 2 places, the smell of dust and coffee clinging to him. Not a man of means, but a man who kept what he had. He must have been alone, too. The way he kept glancing toward the horizon instead of her told her as much. "You headed somewhere?" he asked after a while. Evelyn looked straight ahead. "Anywhere that'll let me earn my keep." He gave a short nod. "Ain't much of that left these days. Folks closing doors faster than winter. Then I'll find one still open," she said. Her voice had iron in it this time, enough to make him glance her way. He didn't smile, but there was a flicker in his eyes, the kind that said he respected the fight more than the words. When they reached the edge of town, the wind died for a moment. The air was thick with the smell of dry hay and something faintly sweet, like bread she hadn't tasted in months. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and spoke so quietly she almost missed it. "You can rest at my place tonight." "It ain't charity. What is it then?" she asked, suspicion threading through her exhaustion. He hesitated, then said, "A trade, maybe. You cook better than I do, and I could use another pair of hands." Evelyn didn't answer right away. The town's wooden signs creaked in the wind, and from somewhere far off, a church bell tolled noon. She looked down at Jamie, at the dirt crusted on his small boots, at the tear in his sleeve she hadn't been able to mend. "All right," she whispered finally. Caleb flicked the reins, and the wagon rolled forward again. Behind them, Dry Hollow's gossiping windows watched, but the dust rose high enough to hide the looks. Evelyn didn't notice. She was staring at the man's back, wondering who he was before the world hardened him. And deep down, she feared one thing most of all: that kindness like his never came without cost. By the time Caleb's wagon rattled up the narrow hill to his farm, the sky had begun to bruise with evening. The land looked tired, same as him. Patches of brittle grass, a half-collapsed fence, smoke curling from a small chimney that leaned a little too far to one side. It wasn't much of a place, but it was his. Evelyn sat stiff beside him, one arm around Jamie, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. She could feel the heat of his little body and the ache in her own bones. The ride had been quiet, but not the uncomfortable kind. More like 2 people too used to silence. When the wagon stopped, she expected Caleb to climb down first. Say something plain and short, maybe, "You can rest inside." Instead, he just looked at the cabin, then at her, like he was seeing it through her eyes, and suddenly realizing how bare it was. "It's not much," he said at last. voice soft as the dust around them. "It's more than we had this morning," she answered. That made him look at her for the first time since they'd left the road. Something eased in his face, just for a heartbeat. Then he nodded toward the door. Inside smelled of smoke and pine. There was one table, one chair, and a small iron stove that looked older than both of them. Evelyn noticed how carefully the place was kept, despite the cracks in the walls. A coat hung by the door, patched like the man himself. Caleb lit a kerosene lamp, the flame trembling a little before it steadied. The light touched his face, and Evelyn saw he wasn't that old, just carved up by weather and worry. He pointed to the cot in the corner. "He can take that. I'll roll a blanket by the fire." "I don't want to trouble you," she murmured. "You already said that once," he replied, not unkindly. Didn't stick then either. For a second she almost smiled. Almost. But Jamie stirred, rubbing his eyes, and the moment slipped away. She helped him lie down, whispering something small and motherly, then turned back to see Caleb filling an old tin pot at the stove. He poured her the first cup of coffee and sat down on the floor, back against the wall like a man who'd forgotten what company felt like. She watched him for a long time before speaking. "You live here alone?" "Mostly." "Mostly?" "Had a brother once. We built that fence together," he said, motioning toward the window. "He took off when the drought hit hard. Figured there was better land somewhere else. Never wrote." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Sometimes leaving's the only way folks know how to keep going." Caleb met her eyes across the dim room. "Sometimes staying's harder." That silence again. Different this time. Not empty, but full of something they didn't have words for yet. Jamie mumbled in his sleep, reaching out as if for her hand, and Evelyn tucked the blanket higher over his shoulders. "He used to ask where his father went," she said quietly. "I told him heaven, but I think he knew better." Caleb didn't look at her. He stared into the stove where the flames had burned down to a dull red. World takes more than it gives. But sometimes it leaves a corner you can still build from. She didn't know what to say to that. So she busied herself with the small things, setting cups in order, folding her shawl, finding something to keep her hands from shaking. He noticed, of course. Men who worked with their hands always noticed movement before words. "You don't owe me anything," he said after a while. Evelyn looked up. "Then why help me?" He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the tin cup, thinking. "Guess I don't like seeing people left out in the cold." "Seen enough of that to last me." Her throat tightened. "We won't stay long." "Just until—" "Don't rush it," he interrupted. "The land's mean this time of year. You'd both freeze before morning if you tried walking out." She wanted to argue. Every instinct in her said to. But when she looked at Jamie, his face soft in the lamplight, she couldn't. For the first time in months, he looked safe. Caleb stood and adjusted the lantern wick, casting the room in a deeper amber glow. "Rest easy. Tomorrow we'll see what the day brings." When he turned away, Evelyn let herself breathe. The sound of the wind outside had softened. Even the old boards of the cabin seemed to settle. She lay down beside her son, listening to the quiet scrape of Caleb's boots as he spread his blanket near the fire. She thought of the road behind them, the stairs, the whispers, the cold nights, and wondered what kind of man still offered warmth without asking for anything back. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the window like a cautious hand. Inside, 3 people who didn't quite trust the world shared the same thin shelter, and for the first time in a long while, the dark didn't feel like an enemy. Morning sunlight slipped through the cracks in Caleb's cabin, landing across the floorboards like narrow paths of gold. Evelyn had been awake long before it came. She was sitting at the small table, mending Jamie's torn sleeve, her hand steady but her thoughts anything but. The rhythm of the needle helped, stitch after stitch, like trying to hold a life together one small piece at a time. Caleb stepped in quietly from outside, boots dusted with frost. He paused when he saw her. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," she said without looking up. "Been up since the rooster forgot to crow." He smiled faintly at that, setting a sack of feed by the door. "You can't sew on an empty stomach." "There's coffee on the stove." Evelyn poured herself a cup, the tin warm against her palms. She wasn't used to a man's voice filling a room without raising it. No barked orders, no sighs of disappointment. Caleb's voice just existed there, calm as the slow crackle of the fire. Jamie soon padded in, still sleepy, hair sticking up in every direction. "Morning, Mr. Hart." "Morning, Jamie. Think you can help me feed the hens today?" The boy looked at his mother, half asking permission. Evelyn nodded. "Go on. Just don't let them chase you first." Watching them step out together made something shift inside her. It had been so long since she'd seen her son laugh at anything that wasn't pretend. She listened to his small voice fade into the yard, followed by Caleb's low chuckle. The sound was gentle, unhurried, like the world had stopped expecting things to go wrong. She turned back to her sewing, but her mind drifted. It had been nearly 2 weeks since they'd come to stay. She still caught herself waiting for the catch and the kindness, for the moment a debt would be named or a promise demanded. But it never came. Caleb just worked, ate, talked little, and made sure there was enough for all three of them. The simplicity of it was almost unnerving. Later that morning, when the sun climbed higher, Evelyn went out to hang the washed clothes by the fence. The wind tugged at her skirt and carried the smell of earth and hay. Caleb was mending a post nearby, sleeves rolled up, hammer steady. "You work that fence every day," she called out. "It ever stay fixed?" "Not once," he said, not looking up. "But fixing it makes the day seem shorter." She smiled, though he didn't see it. "You sound like a man who likes fighting lost battles." He leaned on the post, thoughtful. "Maybe. Or maybe I just like proving the ground ain't won yet." There it was again, that quiet strength she couldn't quite name. The kind that didn't need to announce itself, just existed like a slow-moving river under dust. By noon they shared a meal, boiled potatoes, bread, and a little salt pork. Jamie talked the whole time, explaining how the chickens had opinions about who fed them. Caleb listened with patient eyes, occasionally tossing in a word or two, just enough to make the boy grin. Evelyn sat back for a moment, taking it in, the ordinary piece of it. The scrape of forks, the clink of the tin plates, the sound of breathing that didn't carry fear. That evening, as the sun bled orange over the hills, Evelyn sat by the stove reading aloud from an old Bible she'd found on a shelf. She wasn't reading for faith, just for the sound of words filling the space. Caleb sat nearby, whittling something small and rough from a block of wood. When she stopped, he asked quietly, "You miss town?" "Not the people," she said. "But I miss not being talked about." He nodded, eyes still on his work. "They'll talk no matter what, always do. But the noise don't reach this far if you don't let it." Silence hung between them again, comfortable now, not fragile. Evelyn folded the page and watched him shape the wood with slow care. "What are you making?" she asked. He hesitated, then handed it to her. It was a small horse, rough but steady on its legs. "For Jamie. Thought he might like something that doesn't run off." Her throat tightened. "He will," she said softly. "He's been chasing shadows too long." Caleb just nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "We all have." That night, after Jamie fell asleep clutching the little wooden horse, Evelyn lay awake listening to the wind outside. It was softer now, less cruel, as if the land itself was learning to rest. She thought about how easily a stranger had become a shelter, and how trust wasn't a thing you gave once. It was something built, quietly, like mending a fence that would never stay whole but still needed tending. When she finally drifted off, the last sound she heard was the faint creak of the boards and the steady breathing of the man who had given her nothing but space. And somehow, that was everything. Sunday came with the sound of the church bell echoing through the valley. Evelyn had almost forgotten what Sundays felt like, how still everything turned, how quiet the air became when people dressed themselves in righteousness. Caleb had hitched the mule early, said he needed to trade a sack of grain in town. He'd asked if she wanted to come. She said yes before thinking it through. Now walking beside him on the dusty main street, she could feel the eyes before she saw them. The same women who'd whispered behind prayer books last spring now stood outside the general store, lips pressed thin, hats sitting proud. Evelyn kept her chin high, but her stomach churned. She told herself she didn't care what they thought, but lies like that were hard to swallow twice. Inside the store, the owner greeted Caleb with that slow, measured politeness that hides judgment underneath. Evelyn stayed close to Jamie, pretending to study the bolts of calico. When she reached for a piece of cloth, 2 women nearby lowered their voices just enough for her to hear. Didn't take her long, did it? "Poor man, she's using him. Same as she used her husband's friends before he died." Her fingers froze on the fabric. She didn't turn, didn't flinch. Caleb appeared beside her a moment later, coins clinking in his hand. He saw her face, the way her eyes had gone distant, and knew. "Let's go," he said quietly. They walked out together, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't the soft kind they'd learned to share. It was the heavy kind. The kind that comes when both hearts are trying to protect the same wound. On the ride back, Evelyn stared at the horizon, her hands locked in her lap. "They'll never let me live quiet," she said finally. "Not here. Not anywhere." Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. "You're living just fine. Let 'em talk." "It's not just talk," she said, her voice sharp now. "They make it truth by repeating it." He wanted to tell her it didn't matter, that the land didn't listen to gossip, that a woman's worth wasn't decided by those with clean gloves and empty souls, but the words jammed in his throat. Caleb was a man who fixed fences, not feelings. When they reached the cabin, Jamie ran ahead, chasing the hens, laughing like nothing had happened. Evelyn stood by the wagon, still as the post beside it. Caleb turned to say something, anything, but she spoke first. "I shouldn't have come to town." "Why?" "Because I made things worse for you," he frowned. "For me?" "They look at you now, Caleb. They think you took me in for the wrong reasons. And maybe," she swallowed, hating how her voice trembled, "maybe they're right to think that." He stepped closer, jaw tight. "You think I helped you for gossip?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Her words hit like dry wind, cold and cutting. Caleb looked away, staring at the horizon the way men do when they can't look at what's breaking right in front of them. "You should rest," he said finally. "Long day." Evelyn didn't answer. She turned, went inside, and closed the door gently but firmly behind her. For the first time in weeks, they ate apart. Caleb sat outside with the dark coming down around him, the lamplight flickering through the window like a heartbeat he no longer shared. He heard Jamie's soft voice inside, asking questions. Evelyn whispering answers she didn't mean. Later, when the lamp went out, he stayed there under the stars, wondering how something so simple, kindness, shelter, a bit of peace, could turn into a sin in other people's mouths. He thought of her words. Maybe they're right to think that. That cut deeper than he expected. Because he'd never planned on caring for her this much, and now he didn't know how to stop. The night wind picked up, dry and restless, rattling the tin roof like an old memory that refused to fade. Inside, Evelyn lay awake staring at the dark ceiling, the quiet between them louder than any rumor. By morning, neither would know who started the silence, but both would know it was there to stay. The morning broke slow and pale, light crawling over the hills like it wasn't sure it belonged there. Caleb hadn't slept. He'd spent most of the night sitting by the cold stove, turning his hat in his hands, thinking about every word Evelyn had said, and the ones she hadn't. The silence in the cabin had turned into something heavy, almost alive. When the rooster finally crowed, he rose, his joints stiff and his heart worse. Outside the air was sharp with frost. The ground crunched under his boots as he walked toward the barn. The animals stirred, the same as always, but he moved slower, each task weighed down by what he'd left unsaid. Evelyn heard him through the wall, the steady rhythm of a man doing chores he could do in his sleep. She wanted to open the door, to say something, anything, but pride and hurt tangled in her chest like barbed wire. The words she'd thrown at him yesterday still burned. Maybe they're right to think that. She hadn't meant it. Not really. But once a word's out, you can't call it back. Jamie stirred in his bed, the little wooden horse still in his hand. "Mama?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Is Mr. Hart mad?" Evelyn paused before answering. "No, sweetheart, just tired." She looked toward the window and saw Caleb leading the mule out, breath fogging in the cold. He moved like a man carrying too much alone. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't want to name. By midday, Caleb hitched the wagon again. "Going into town," he said briefly, not meeting her eyes. "You don't have to." He cut her off, quiet but firm. "Need to settle something." Evelyn stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself as she watched him drive away. Dust rose behind the wagon wheels, and for a moment it felt like the world was leaving her all over again. In Dry Hollow, folks were already gathered in front of the church when Caleb arrived. The banker Lyle was there too. Slick suit, smug smile, holding that cursed debt paper like it was scripture. "You come to pay what's due?" Lyle asked loud enough for the onlookers to hear. Caleb climbed down, eyes calm but burning underneath. Not with money. Not today, Lyle smirked. Then I reckon you're about out of time. Caleb reached into the wagon and pulled out the last things he owned worth anything: his saddle, his father's pocket knife, a small sack of seed grain. He placed them in front of Lyle, his voice steady. You'll get every cent, every crop, every piece, earned honest. But you won't shame me to get it. A hush fell. Reverend Pike shifted awkwardly, and a few townsmen looked away. For the first time, Caleb didn't sound like a man asking for mercy. He sounded like a man claiming his place. He looked at them all, eyes sweeping across the faces that had whispered for months. And you'll leave her be, he said, quieter now. That woman's done more work in 2 weeks than half this town does in a season. She don't owe anyone here an apology. Lyle blinked, caught off guard. You defending her name now, Hart? Caleb met his gaze. No, I'm standing by it. When he returned that evening, the light was fading gold across the ridge. Evelyn stood by the porch, Jamie in front of her, both waiting. She didn't speak as he stepped down, but the relief in her eyes said enough. He handed Jamie a small paper bag. For you. Inside were 2 pieces of hard candy, bright red like glass. Jamie grinned, the kind of grin that fixed the whole day. Evelyn's voice came soft. You didn't have to go. He looked at her then, really looked. Yeah, I did. For a long while, neither moved. The wind rustled the dry grass. The world around them seemed to quiet down, waiting. Finally, Evelyn took a breath. Caleb, I said things I shouldn't have. He shook his head. You said what you needed to. But I should have told you. I don't care what they say. I ain't letting other people's words decide what kind of man I am, or what kind of home this is. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears but with something steadier. Then I guess we're both staying. He smiled faintly. Seemed so. Inside, the lamp was lit again. Jamie played near the fire, his laughter echoing softly off the cabin walls. Evelyn and Caleb shared quiet company at the table. No walls left between them this time, just the warm hum of life finding its way back. Outside, the wind eased, carrying the scent of thawing earth. Winter hadn't gone yet, but it had begun to loosen its hold, and for the first time in a long, long while, Evelyn felt the world stop judging and start forgiving.